On November 27, 1996, William Scott Scurlock, dubbed Hollywood by the police and the Hollywood Bandit by the press because of his penchant for theatrical disguises, attempts to rob Seafirst Bank in Lake City of $1.08 million. It is his 15th bank robbery in the Seattle area in 4.5 years, and the Puget Sound Violent Crime Task Force has been awaiting his next attempt. Police spot Scurlock and his two accomplices in their getaway vehicle and a chase ensues. During a gun battle, Scurlock manages to escape on foot, leaving his wounded accomplices behind to be captured. He hides overnight inside a small camper in the backyard of a nearby home, but the following day is seen inside by its owners, who call the 911 emergency dispatch center. While police close in on his hideout, Hollywood commits suicide by shooting himself in the head. The number of robberies and the amount stolen, almost $2.3 million, makes Scurlock one of the most prolific bank robbers in the history of the United States. Son of preacher and teacher, William Scott Scurlock was born and raised in Virginia. His father, William Scurlock, was a Baptist minister and his mother, Mary Jane, was an elementary school teacher. Scott had 3 sisters, 2 older and 1 younger. Although religious, his parents were extremely permissive and Scott grew up without guidelines, never developing a moral compass. He understood the difference between right and wrong, but didn't care. Acquaintances described Scott's personality as charming, charismatic, and extremely manipulative. Like Peter Pan, Scott never grew up or accepted adult responsibilities, but tenaciously clung to his adolescent interests and attitudes. In 1977, while living in Hawaii, Scurlock was fired from a landscaping company for growing marijuana on the firm's land. He moved to Olympia and in 1978 enrolled at Evergreen State College, where he studied organic chemistry and biochemistry. And that's where he learned how to make crystal meth, a refined, crystalline form of methamphetamine. Scurlock used Evergreen's chemistry laboratory to manufacture the highly addictive, illegal drug, using ephedrine, an ingredient found in non-prescription cold and allergy medicine, and chemicals stolen from the school. He attended classes at the college sporadically for 6 years, while becoming a major source of supply of the drug in the Northwest. Scurlock rented a nondescript, 1,700 square foot farmhouse which sat on a 19.25-acre tract of land at 1506 Overholse Road Northwest in Olympia, near Evergreen State College. There was a large barn on the property, which was the perfect place for hiding a clandestine laboratory. In the early 1980s, he started building a treehouse in a stand of 7 cedar trees on the back portion of the acreage, using materials he stole from nearby lumberyards. It took Scurlock and his friends many months to construct the 1,500 square foot, unstructured treehouse. It was 3 stories high and reached more than 60 feet above the ground, facing Mount Rainier. The house had 30 windows, electricity, plumbing, a full kitchen, a working bathroom and a fireplace. When the farm was put up for sale in 1990, Scurlock used $110,000 from his cache of drug profits to purchase the property and protect his unauthorized, rickety creation. From drugs to banks. In 1990, Scurlock's main meth distributor was murdered, making him realize just how violent and dangerous the drug business was. He stopped manufacturing crystal meth, but now needed another source of easy money to support his extravagant lifestyle. Because Scurlock liked to travel extensively, he never held a real job his entire life. The caches of drugs and money, sealed in plastic buckets and buried on his property, financed his activities for approximately 1 year. Now, running low on funds, Scurlock decided that robbing banks would be a good choice and a great adventure. He chose a target and then recruited a close friend from college, Mark John Biggins.
Biggins's girlfriend, Tracy Marsh, was persuaded to drive the getaway car. Scurlock and his friends pulled their first bank robbery shortly before noon on Thursday, June 25, 1992. It was the Seafirst Bank, now Bank of America, at 4112 Madison Street in Seattle's exclusive Madison Park neighborhood. Scurlock disguised himself with a false nose and heavy theater makeup, and Biggins wore a plastic Ronald Reagan mask. The robbery was successful, no one got hurt, and the trio returned to Olympia with $19,971. Biggins decided he didn't like robbing banks and moved to Darby, Montana, with his girlfriend, where he got a job building log cabins. Biggins's hiatus from robbing banks would last for 4 years. Scurlock enjoyed the thrill he experienced from the heist and decided to make robbing banks his new profession. On Friday, August 14, 1992, he brazenly entered the same Seafirst Bank in Madison Park, alone and brandishing a handgun, and stole $8,124. Although Scurlock was heavily disguised, his demeanor and intimidating style were much the same as his first robbery. This violent method is known as a takeover or take-charge robbery, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, and Seattle Police Department initially nicknamed him the take-charge robber. Over the next 3 months, Scurlock and his accomplices robbed 4 more banks in Seattle, then stopped. The last heist was on Thursday, November 19, 1992, at the Hawthorne Hills branch of the Seafirst Bank, 4020 Northeast 55th Street, which netted the gang $252,000. By now, the police and FBI were quite familiar with Scurlock's theatrical disguises and style, gleaned from witnesses and bank surveillance cameras, and changed his sobriquet to Hollywood. The media preferred Hollywood Bandit. Bandit resumes robbing banks. Scurlock spent the $322,870 he had stolen in 1992 within a year and then decided to resume his favorite occupation, robbing banks. He had enlisted a childhood friend, Stephen Paul Myers, born in 1950, to help him launder the money through numerous trips to gambling casinos in Las Vegas, Nevada. Now he wanted Myers to help him rob banks. He chose the same Seafirst Bank in Hawthorne Hills where he had made a $250,000 score the previous year. Scurlock and Myers watched the bank for several days, then on Wednesday, November 24, 1993, the day before Thanksgiving, made their move. Scurlock went inside the bank while Myers stayed outside in his vehicle with a portable two-way radio, monitoring police frequencies on a scanner. The robbery took place without a hitch, but this time they only got $98,571. Scurlock buried all the loot on his property, except for $5,000 which he magnanimously gave to Myers for his participation. It was the amount Scurlock typically paid accomplices, since he was the mastermind and took the most risks, and since it kept them hungry for more. Scurlock and Myers robbed 5 banks in 1994, 3 in Seattle and 2 in Portland, stealing a total of $263,599. In January 1995, the bandits hit 2 banks. Scurlock stole $11,924 on January 18 from the Wallingford branch of the First Interstate Bank, now Wells Fargo Bank, 1701 North 45th Street, but a dye pack exploded, coloring the money red, and he had to abandon the loot. Undeterred, on January 27, Scurlock returned to the Madison Park branch of the Seafirst Bank for the 3rd time. He carried away $252,466, enough to tide him over for the rest of the year. Closing in on Scurlock. Meanwhile, the Puget Sound Violent Crimes Task Force, a group composed of FBI agents, Seattle police detectives, King County Sheriff's detectives, and other law enforcement agencies, made catching the bandit, now dubbed Hollywood, their top priority. Aside from the money, the police were worried it was only a matter of time before someone was killed. They carefully charted the details of the robberies and pored over scores of surveillance photographs, establishing his modus operandi. The pattern seemed to be connected to the amounts of money the bandit stole. They calculated that Hollywood was spending about $20,000 a month and determined approximately when he would need more cash. During this period, the task force would be waiting near Hollywood's favorite banks, Seafirst and First Interstate, in neighborhoods where he had made big scores in the past. In addition, the Washington State Bankers Association, working in conjunction with Crime Stoppers of Puget Sound, offered a $50,000 reward for information leading to the bandit's arrest and conviction. For the next bank heist, Scurlock enlisted the help of both Steve Myers, who would continue as the outside lookout, and Mark Biggins, who would assist inside the bank with crowd control. On January 25, 1996, the gang robbed the Wedgwood branch of First Interstate, 8517, 35th Avenue Northeast, and escaped with $141,405. Coveting a much larger stash of money, Scurlock hit the Madison Park branch of the First Interstate Bank, 4009E, Madison Street on May 22, 1996 for $114,978. But it wasn't enough to satisfy his lust for money and adventure. so Hollywood decided to rob 3 banks in one day. Potentially, it would be his last big score and something the police and FBI would never expect. He targeted Seafirst Bank branches in Lake City, Green Lake, and the University District. But Scurlock changed his mind at the last minute, deciding to rob only the branch in Lake City. Scurlock's last heist. At 5:41 p.m., Wednesday, November 27, 1996, Scurlock and Biggins entered the Seafirst Bank at 2800 NE 125 Street, while Myers lingered nearby in a getaway vehicle. The minute they walked through the door, one of the tellers, having been briefed about the heavily disguised robber, hit the silent alarm button. The robbers forced everyone to lie down on the floor, and while Biggins held them at gunpoint,
Scurlock entered the vault with the head teller and stuffed bricks of money into a large nylon duffel bag. The bandits were out of the bank in 4 minutes and calmly walked down the street. A customer disobeyed orders, however, following them to a blue Dodge Caravan and then calling the 911 emergency dispatch center with a description of the car and their direction of travel. Although the task force had dozens of police officers on alert for a robbery, Lake City was a first, and all the cars were patrolling in the wrong neighborhoods. Due to a severe wind and rainstorm and holiday traffic, the bank robbers were slow to leave the area. Even though they switched from the getaway car to a white Chevrolet Astra van, it wasn't long before 3 task force members, acting primarily on instinct, began tailing the van, intending to make a traffic stop. While Scurlock calmly drove south, Myers and Biggins began rummaging through the bundles of bills on the floor of the van, looking for electronic tracking devices. Scurlock didn't wait to be pulled over, however, and stopped the van on 24th Avenue Northeast in the Ravenna neighborhood. He jumped out with a 12-gauge shotgun and pointed it at the task force officers, but he was unable to fire the weapon. The officers fired several shots at the van, which immediately sped away. After a few more blocks, the van stopped and Myers exited the side door with a shotgun and opened fire. The officers returned fire and once again the van sped away. 2 blocks later, someone inside the van broke out the right rear window and began firing an assault rifle. Scurlock shut off the headlights, bailed out of the vehicle while it was slowly moving and fled on foot. The van continued through a front yard at Northeast 77th Street and 20th Avenue Northeast and struck a house. Inside the van, the officers found Biggins and Myers, who had both been seriously wounded, 2 12-gauge shotguns, a U.S. military .308 caliber M14 semi-automatic rifle, 2 9mm semi-automatic pistols, 3 Motorola 2-way radios, a police frequency scanner, and $1.08 million in cash. Seattle Fire Department's Medic 1 paramedics transported both suspects to the emergency room at Harborview Medical Center in Seattle for treatment of non-life-threatening gunshot wounds. During questioning, Myers told FBI agent Sean Johnson that Scott Scurlock was the mastermind behind the heist and that he lived in Olympia, searching for the fugitive. Meanwhile, the Seattle Police Department established a 6-block perimeter around the area where Hollywood escaped and was thought to be hiding. While police officers went door to door trying to determine if anyone was being held hostage or had seen anything unusual, emergency response teams, ERT, and K-9 units began methodically searching for the fugitive, who was known to be armed with a 9mm semi-automatic Glock pistol. Although it was pouring rain and extremely windy, the hunt for Hollywood continued throughout the night. Patrol officers took up defensive positions. Sergeant Howard Monta tried to elicit a response from the person inside, but was unsuccessful. Finally, he pried a louvered window open and emptied 2 canisters of capsicum pepper spray into the interior, without result. When Sergeant Monta attempted to unlock the door, there was a single gunshot and he scrambled for cover. The patrol officers responded by firing over 30 rounds at the camper shell. Dozens of Seattle police officers, FBI agents, and detectives from the Puget Sound Violent Crime Task Force arrived at the scene, cordoned off a 5-block area, and began evacuating nearby homes. The Seattle police brought in an armored vehicle and positioned it near the camper in preparation for an assault. Hostage negotiators attempted repeatedly to contact the person inside, using a bullhorn, but were unsuccessful. At 6 p.m., ERT fired a tear gas shell into camper, but still there was no response. They waited 20 minutes, and then fired another shell into the camper. At 7:40 p.m., ERT officers in gas masks carefully approached the camper, and Sergeant Paul McDonough opened the door. They found a man lying dead on the floor in the dinette with a 9mm Glock pistol and one empty shell casing next to his body. Aftermath. Based on information from Steve Myers, the FBI served a federal search warrant on Scurlock's houses and property in Olympia on Thanksgiving Day. They discovered a cache of weapons, which included handguns, a silencer, several rifles, 2 sawed-off shotguns, and a large store of ammunition. The agents also seized over $20,000 in cash, passports, airline tickets, police frequency scanners, and portable two-way radios. Hidden under the floor in the barn, they found a secret room where Scurlock applied his makeup, stored his disguises, and counted the loot. After the Seattle Police Homicide Unit completed their crime scene investigation, the body was transported to the Harborview Medical Center morgue for autopsy. 1996, Steve Myers, age 46, and Mark Biggins, age 42, were charged in absentia in Seattle District Court with suspicion of armed robbery and attempted murder of police officers, both state offenses. Judge Darcy C. Goodman set bail at $1 million each.
The number of robberies and the amounts stolen, almost $2.3 million, make William Scott Scurlock one of the most prolific bank robbers in the history of the United States. With breathtaking reenactments and expert insights, witness how one man turned bank robbery into a dramatic spectacle. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more gripping crime stories. Ciao.